It had been 3 days since Charlie, the retired police dog, refused to eat. The days had stretched into long hours filled with worry and uncertainty. Sarah Parker stood in her kitchen, staring at the untouched bowl of food. The morning sunlight poured through the window, casting a soft glow over the empty dish. Her gaze drifted toward the living room, where Charlie lay, his dark eyes fixed on the distant woods beyond their backyard. There was an urgency in his stillness, an unease that Sarah couldn't ignore. "Charlie's not eating again," Sarah whispered to her husband, Mark, who stood in the doorway, worry creasing his face. Mark's eyes followed Charlie's unwavering attention toward the tree line, where the dog's instincts seemed to sense something none of them could. The once vibrant German Shepherd had grown thinner, his body taut with a tension that spoke of something beyond physical decline. Welcome to Heart Force Channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. Their daughter, Emily, knelt beside Charlie, her small fingers gently stroking his black and tan coat. But even Emily's tender touch couldn't break through the barrier that had settled over the dog. Charlie's presence had always been a comfort, a symbol of loyalty and protection, but now he seemed lost in something they couldn't comprehend. That night, the security cameras would reveal the truth, a shadowy figure lurking in the woods, a figure Charlie knew all too well. A figure that, as it turned out, held the key to unraveling a mystery that had haunted the community for 6 long years. The peaceful town of Winchester, Massachusetts, was a place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries over backyard fences, and the most significant event of the day was often the local bakery's latest pastry offering. But for the Parker family, something darker was unfolding in their backyard, where their retired police dog, Charlie, had become more than just a pet. He was a guardian, a silent protector who had walked beside them for the past 6 months, bringing them comfort in the face of their own personal trials. Sarah Parker had seen it all in her career as a veterinarian. She'd treated hundreds of animals, many of them scarred by trauma, but none like Charlie. He wasn't just any dog. He was a hero in his own right. A retired K-9 officer who had served alongside Officer Jim Anderson for years, Charlie had been the department star, a dog who had saved lives, solved mysteries, and brought justice to those who needed it most. But now, in the quiet of their suburban home, Charlie seemed broken, unraveling in ways they couldn't understand. The change had started slowly. Charlie had always been a reliable, disciplined dog, patrolling the yard and walking Emily to the bus stop every morning. But recently, he had become distant, refusing his meals and avoiding Emily's loving touch. His gaze remained fixed on the woods behind their property, his body coiled with an alertness that was more akin to a soldier preparing for battle than a family pet enjoying his retirement. It was the 3rd day when Sarah finally noticed it. His refusal to eat wasn't because of illness or old age. It was something else, something far more disturbing. Charlie wasn't just withdrawing from food. He was watching, waiting. In the middle of the night, Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. As the surveillance footage captured Charlie's movements, Sarah's blood ran cold. The German Shepherd, usually so calm, stood rigid in the backyard, his eyes locked on the dense woods. He wasn't barking or growling, but his body was taut with tension. And then, in the darkness, something moved. A figure, tall, lean, and strangely familiar. The hairs on Sarah's neck stood up as the truth began to sink in. Charlie wasn't just being protective. He was trying to warn them. The footage continued to reveal an unsettling pattern. Every night, the figure would appear between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., maintaining a distance, yet always watching. Observing, Charlie never retreated. He stayed alert, his eyes locked on the figure like a soldier on high alert. The silence in the yard was broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant growl of a dog that could sense danger long before it arrived. Mark wasn't sure what to make of it. His instincts told him something wasn't right, but as a high school history teacher, he was used to dealing with facts, not shadows in the woods. Yet Sarah, with her years of experience handling animals, knew this wasn't normal behavior. This wasn't just a dog trying to protect his family. This was something more, a warning, perhaps, or a call for help. Emily, too, sensed it. The young girl who had been Charlie's caretaker, who had shared her heart with him since the day he arrived, now found herself watching him with a growing sense of unease. What had changed in him? What had triggered this vigilance? And what did it all mean? The mystery deepened as days turned into weeks. With each passing day, the tension between the Parkers and the strange figure in the woods grew more intense. It wasn't just Charlie's health that was at stake now. It was the safety of their entire family. The once quiet neighborhood was no longer the sanctuary it had once been. Someone, or something, was out there, and Charlie was the only one who could see it. The Parkers weren't just watching a dog unravel. They were watching a story unfold, one that would lead them to confront a painful past, a long-forgotten secret, and a hidden hero whose actions would change everything. The question remained, would they uncover the truth in time to protect themselves and the community, or would the shadows of the past swallow them whole? As the days passed, Sarah and Mark found themselves caught in a whirlwind of unanswered questions, their peaceful life slipping further from their grasp with each passing hour. They had always lived a simple life, content in the quiet beauty of Winchester, Massachusetts. But now, their world was becoming increasingly unstable, shaken by the mysterious behavior of their dog and a shadowy figure that Charlie seemed to recognize from the woods. Sarah sat in her study, staring at the security footage on her computer. The grainy video showed Charlie, standing still in the backyard, his ears perked up, his eyes locked on something beyond the trees. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing in on her, a gnawing sense that something was wrong, something she couldn't yet understand. Mark, ever the skeptic, leaned against the doorframe, watching her in silence. "You really think he's seeing something out there?" he asked, his voice filled with doubt. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tinged with worry. "But whatever it is, it's affecting him. He's not the same dog he was when he first came to us. And it's not just the eating. It's the way he's watching, the way he's pacing at night. It's like he's waiting for something or someone." Mark ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. "But how could we know? He's just a dog. He can't tell us what's going on." Charlie's sudden behavior had put their family in a strange position. The Parker home, once a sanctuary from the outside world, had transformed into something else entirely, a place of fear, uncertainty, and, most unsettling of all, suspicion. Sarah's mind drifted back to the moment when Charlie had first come into their lives. He had been a retired police dog, a hero with a storied career and a reputation for saving lives. His partnership with Officer J formed a bond that seemed unbreakable. Charlie had been the department's most trusted canine officer, earning accolades for his bravery and service. But after the fateful night in 2023, when Charlie had stayed by Anderson's side, protecting him from an armed assailant during a domestic violence call, everything changed. Anderson was left with a career-ending injury, and Charlie was retired from active duty. He came to the Parkers, seeking peace after years of service. But it was clear now that peace was not what Charlie was looking for. As Sarah continued to review the footage, she noticed a pattern. Charlie's focus on the woods wasn't random. He was positioning himself at the same spots each night, standing at attention at the property's edges, his gaze fixed on specific trees, as if guarding against something lurking in the shadows. It wasn't a dog's instinct. It was the precision of a trained officer, a canine who had been taught to detect threats to protect his family. She couldn't shake the feeling that Charlie was trying to tell them something. She had seen enough in her career to know when an animal was in distress, and this wasn't the typical signs of aging or anxiety. This was a dog on alert, waiting for something to happen, something that had yet to come. Mark finally broke the silence. "Do you think it has anything to do with his past? With what he went through as a police dog?" Sarah paused. "I don't know, but I can't help but feel like he's picking up on something that we're not." That's when Emily entered the room, her expression unusually solemn for a 12-year-old girl. She had been keeping her own journal, documenting Charlie's behavior with the precision of a seasoned investigator. "Mom, I think I've figured something out," she said, her voice steady but full of concern. Sarah turned, her heart tightening at the sight of her daughter's serious face. "What's going on, honey?" "I've been watching Charlie, too," Emily said, sitting down beside Sarah. "He's not just guarding the backyard. He's watching something beyond it, something in the woods." She paused, "And I think he's been trying to tell us something for days." Sarah's chest tightened. She had never seen Emily so focused, so perceptive. It was clear that her daughter had noticed things that she and Mark hadn't. "What do you think he's trying to say?" "I don't know," Emily whispered, "but I'm starting to think it's important. It's like he's guarding a secret." For a moment, the room fell silent. The family was united by a growing sense of unease. Sarah had always trusted Charlie. He had been a protector, not just for the community, but for their family. But now, something was different. This dog, who had saved lives and served faithfully, seemed to be on a mission of his own, a mission he couldn't share with words. The following days saw no respite. Charlie's vigilance never wavered, and neither did the presence in the woods. Night after night, the figure appeared, always standing at the edge of the forest, watching the house with a disturbing sense of purpose. It was clear that whoever was out there knew exactly where Charlie and the Parkers lived, and they knew how to remain unseen. The family's fears deepened when a strange pattern emerged in their daily lives. Neighbors began reporting odd occurrences in the neighborhood, strange car movements, unfamiliar faces walking through the woods. It seemed as if the quiet suburban streets had become the epicenter of something far more sinister. By the end of the week, Sarah knew they had to act. They couldn't wait any longer. Whatever was happening, they needed to uncover the truth. For Charlie, for their family, and for the safety of their community. The decision to install security cameras had been a difficult one, but it was necessary. If there was something in the woods, if Charlie was trying to warn them about an impending danger, they needed to know what it was. The camera system they chose was state-of-the-art, capable of picking up the faintest movements in the dark. The first night was uneventful. Just the usual patrols of Charlie, his eyes scanning the perimeter with military precision. But on the second night, something changed. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the footage revealed the figure from the woods. It stood tall and still, just beyond the tree line, watching the house. And Charlie was already there, alert, standing at attention, waiting. The mystery had only deepened. The days after the second night of footage were filled with mounting tension. Every time the sun dipped below the horizon, the Parkers found themselves dreading what would come next. The figure in the woods had become more than just a shadow in the distance. It had become a symbol of something darker, something buried in the past that had come back to haunt them. And Charlie, their loyal companion, seemed to understand it far better than they did. Emily, once bright and enthusiastic, had grown quieter as the days passed. She spent her evenings poring over her journal, documenting Charlie's behavior with meticulous care. Each entry, though brief, reflected a dog torn between his former life as a protector and his new role as a family companion. It was clear that Charlie was not just waiting for something. He was preparing for it. "What do you think he's waiting for?" Emily asked Sarah one evening, her voice soft but full of wonder. "It's like he's expecting something." "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice strained. "But whatever it is, it's important. I can feel it too." Mark, who had been the more practical one, found himself wrestling with a mounting anxiety. The skepticism that had once defined his approach to Charlie's behavior was starting to wear thin. He couldn't ignore the evidence any longer. They weren't just dealing with an old dog's instincts. They were facing something far more complex, something connected to Charlie's past, something that could shatter the peace they had worked so hard to build. The turning point came when Sarah finally decided they needed to involve someone who understood Charlie's past more deeply. Officer Jim Anderson, Charlie's former handler. Sarah had avoided reaching out to him, not wanting to stir up the past, but as the nights grew more unsettling, she realized there was no other choice. She called him early one morning, her voice betraying the urgency she felt. "Jim," she said, I think Charlie's trying to tell us something. Something that has to do with his past, his time on the force. Can you come, please? There was a long pause before Anderson's voice came through the phone, calm but edged with concern. I'll be there as soon as I can, Sarah. I know Charlie. I'll help you figure this out. When Anderson arrived at the Parker home later that afternoon, Charlie reacted immediately. The German shepherd stood at attention, his eyes locking onto Anderson, his body vibrating with the tension of recognition. It was as though no time had passed since their partnership had ended. But there was something else, a deeper level of understanding, as if Charlie was seeking guidance from the one person who had been by his side through all. Anderson knelt down to meet the dog's gaze, his voice gentle but firm. Charlie, what's going on, buddy? You've always been a good dog. But what are you trying to tell us? Charlie's ears perked up, his body stiffening as he turned his head toward the woods. Anderson followed his gaze, frowning. He's not just guarding the house. He's guarding something in those woods. Something or someone. Sarah's heart sank. She had suspected it all along, but hearing it out loud made it real. The dog was on high alert, but not just for ordinary threats. Charlie was protecting a secret buried in the forest behind their home. A secret that, somehow, had been kept hidden for 6 long years. Charlie and I worked a lot of missing persons cases. There were a lot of situations where we tracked down people who didn't want to be found. But there was one case, a boy named Jacob Miller. It was one of the toughest cases I ever worked on. The name struck Sarah like a bolt of lightning. She had heard whispers about the Miller case, how the young boy had gone missing years ago without a trace. The case had never been solved, and the whispers around town had grown into a quiet fear that something darker was at play. What happened? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Anderson stood up, his face clouded with regret. Jacob's case, it didn't make sense from the start. We searched for him for days, and we never found a thing. But there was someone else involved, a man named Thomas Miller, Jacob's uncle. He had been adamant that his nephew was in danger, but no one believed him. The case went cold. But Charlie, Anderson paused, his eyes darkening. Charlie was sure. He knew something we didn't. Charlie knew. Sarah repeated, her mind racing. What are you saying? Anderson's voice lowered, as if speaking the words out loud would bring back a flood of memories. Charlie had this uncanny ability to pick up on things that weren't obvious to anyone else. He was especially sensitive to the emotions of people who were in distress. And Thomas Miller, he wasn't the villain the department thought he was. He was trying to protect Jacob. He knew something we didn't. But when he went missing, the case was buried. No one ever put the pieces together. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. You think Thomas Miller is the one Charlie's guarding? You think that's what he's trying to tell us? Anderson nodded slowly, his face grim. I think Charlie knows something about that case that no one else does. He's trying to help you find it. Whatever Thomas Miller was protecting, it's out there. And Charlie's still watching. Emily, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke up, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. What do we do now? Anderson turned to her, his expression softening. Now we dig. We look for the truth Charlie's been guarding, and we pray it's not too late. The next day, Sarah and Mark made a decision that would change everything. They couldn't wait any longer. They would search the woods themselves. With Anderson's guidance and Charlie leading the way, they would uncover the secrets hidden just beyond their backyard. But as the day turned into night, and the family set out into the woods with Charlie, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far bigger than they had anticipated, a mystery that would challenge everything they thought they knew about justice, loyalty, and the lengths one man and one dog would go to protect those they loved. The woods behind the Parker home had always seemed peaceful, a haven of nature that bordered their quiet life. But as Sarah, Mark, Emily, and Charlie ventured deeper into the trees, the once serene landscape took on a darker tone. The dense canopy of leaves overhead blocked the light, casting the forest floor in shadows. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and the sound of their footsteps seemed to echo unnervingly in the silence. Charlie led the way, his ears perked, his body moving with the same purpose that had defined his career as a police dog. The family followed closely behind, each step growing heavier with the weight of uncertainty. They were searching for something Charlie had been guarding in silence. But as the minutes passed, that something felt like it was slipping further and further from their grasp. "I never thought we'd be doing this," Mark muttered, his voice low as he trailed behind his wife and daughter. "When we adopted Charlie, I thought we were just giving him a peaceful retirement. I didn't know we'd be dragged into all this." Sarah, who had always been the calm one in their family, could feel the tension building. She knew something was hidden in these woods, but she didn't know what. The stories Anderson had shared were like pieces of a puzzle that she couldn't quite fit together. And Charlie was the missing piece. As they walked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The peaceful hum of nature was replaced by a strange stillness, an unnatural silence that made Sarah's skin crawl. Charlie paused abruptly, his eyes scanning the surroundings as though he were searching for something. Then, with a sudden, sharp motion, he darted off the path, heading toward a large oak tree at the edge of the forest. "Charlie, wait," Emily called, but the dog didn't slow down. His determination was unwavering. The family quickened their pace, following Charlie as he moved with military precision. It was clear he was onto something. They reached the oak tree, where Charlie began to circle, his nose twitching as he sniffed the ground. The soil here was disturbed, like something had recently been buried. "Do you think it's here?" Sarah asked, her voice a mix of hope and fear. Mark knelt beside the tree, inspecting the ground. "It looks like it, but this is the only spot that seems different." Charlie barked once, as if confirming what they had already guessed. He began digging, his powerful paws throwing soil aside with alarming speed. The family watched, a mixture of awe and trepidation filling them. They had no idea what they were about to uncover. After several minutes of frantic digging, Charlie's paws hit something hard. Mark's heart skipped a beat. He looked at Sarah, who nodded in silent understanding. They needed to uncover whatever was hidden here. "Emily, get the shovel from the car," Sarah instructed, her voice calm but urgent. Emily sprinted back to the house, returning moments later with the tool in hand. Mark took it from her and began to dig alongside Charlie. The dog continued to dig with fervor, his body straining as if there was a physical connection between him and whatever lay buried beneath the earth. As the hole deepened, a strange metallic object came into view. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. It was a box, weathered but clearly intact. "I don't believe it," Sarah whispered, her hand trembling as she reached for the box. The entire family stood in stunned silence, watching as she lifted it from the ground. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cold and smooth in her hands. Mark glanced at Charlie, whose eyes were fixed on the box. "What do you think is inside?" "I don't know," Sarah said, "but I have a feeling it's connected to Jacob Miller, and maybe to Thomas Miller, too." With shaky hands, Sarah opened the box. Inside were several items wrapped carefully in cloth, photographs, a small notebook, and a collection of other materials that were too delicate to handle without care. She reached for the notebook first, her fingers brushing over its worn cover. It was a child's notebook, filled with the scrawled handwriting of a young boy. "Jacob," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with detailed observations. As her eyes scanned the pages, she felt a chill run down her spine. Jacob had written about his life, his worries, his fears, and most alarmingly, his Uncle Thomas's efforts to protect him. There were notes about emergency plans, secret meetings, and a series of cryptic instructions on how to escape if things ever got too dangerous. "This is the key," Sarah murmured, holding up the notebook for Mark to see. "This explains everything." Thomas Miller was trying to protect Jacob, but it's clear no one believed him. The photos in the box told a similar story. They were of Jacob, but there was something unsettling about them. Photos of him at different ages, but always looking over his shoulder as though he knew someone was watching. There were pictures of Thomas too, but they weren't the ones Sarah had expected. These weren't the photos of a concerned uncle trying to help his family. They were the photos of someone watching, someone who knew more than they should. "This isn't just a rescue mission," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding her chest. This is a cover-up. Thomas Miller wasn't just hiding Jacob. He was trying to expose something bigger. Emily looked up at her mother, her face pale. But why would he hide all this? Why bury it here? Before Sarah could answer, Mark's voice broke through her thoughts. Because someone didn't want this to be found. The truth hung in the air like a heavy cloud. They weren't just dealing with a missing child. They were dealing with a conspiracy that had been buried for years. And the dog that had once served as a protector of the law was now the key to unraveling it all. Charlie had known. And now, so did they. The box, the photographs, the notebook, everything they had discovered in those woods was proof of something far more complex than they had ever imagined. It wasn't just about a missing child. It was about a system that had failed, about a man, Thomas Miller, trying to protect his nephew from forces far beyond his control. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still so much they didn't understand. What had Thomas known? What was he trying to expose? And most importantly, who had been hiding the truth? As Sarah, Mark, and Emily sat in the living room, the weight of the discovery hung over them like a suffocating fog. Charlie, now exhausted from his mission, lay quietly at their feet, his once vibrant eyes dimmed with fatigue. He had done his part. He had found the truth, the hidden evidence that had been buried for far too long. But the story didn't end with the discovery of the box. It was just the beginning. Emily, her face pale but resolute, picked up the notebook and began reading aloud the words written by Jacob himself. It says here, "Uncle Thomas says that sometimes protection means breaking the rules. He says we might have to run away one day, and he'll protect me. He says we'll hide until they can't find us anymore." Sarah's heart sank as she listened to her daughter. Thomas wasn't just trying to keep Jacob safe from harm. He was trying to protect him from something much bigger. Mark ran his hand through his hair. "I don't understand. Why didn't he go to the authorities? Why didn't he go public with this?" "That's just it," Sarah said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. The authorities were part of the problem. Thomas Miller knew that. He had tried to go through the proper channels. He had tried to get help, but they dismissed him. So, he took matters into his own hands. He tried to expose what was happening, but they shut him down. The room was silent for a long moment as the family processed the gravity of what they had uncovered. The pieces of the puzzle were now scattered before them, but they weren't complete yet. They still didn't have all the answers. What had happened to Thomas Miller? What was the truth behind Jacob's disappearance? And who had been watching them from the woods? It was Emily, with her sharp mind and uncanny understanding of Charlie's behavior, who finally spoke the words that made everything click. "What if Charlie's been guarding more than just the past?" she asked, her voice low but filled with certainty. "What if he's been watching over us because he knows the danger is still out there? The people who wanted to keep the truth hidden, they're still watching." Sarah's stomach twisted as the realization hit her. "You're right," she whispered. "They're still out there, and they don't want us to uncover the truth." Charlie, as though sensing the rising tension, lifted his head and growled softly, his eyes darting toward the window. There was something out there, something watching them. Mark, his protective instincts kicking in, walked over to the window and peered through the blinds. He saw nothing, but the feeling was undeniable. They were being watched. "We need to act fast," Mark said, his voice grim. "This is bigger than we thought." That night, Sarah made the call. She reached out to Detective Reynolds, the one person who had supported their investigation from the beginning. He had helped them uncover the truth behind Charlie's behavior, and now he would help them expose the forces that had been manipulating the situation from shadows. The following morning, Reynolds arrived with a small team of officers. They didn't waste any time. They had the box, the photographs, and the notebook, everything they needed to reopen the investigation. They were determined to finally bring the truth to light, no matter how difficult it was. "Charlie knew," Reynolds said as he examined the box, his voice filled with quiet reverence. "This dog has been guarding the truth for years. He's been telling you all along, but you had to be ready to hear it." As the investigation ramped up, the Parkers found themselves at the center of a whirlwind. The town of Winchester, once a quiet, close-knit community, was now divided. Some residents rallied around the Parkers, supporting them in their quest for justice. Others, however, were too deeply entangled in the web of corruption and secrecy to let the truth surface. But as the weeks passed, the evidence mounted. The community's doubts began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of realization. Thomas Miller had been right all along. He had been trying to protect his nephew, to shield him from a world that had failed them both. And now, thanks to Charlie's unwavering loyalty and the Parkers' determination, the truth was finally coming to light. By the end of the month, the investigation had broken wide open. Richard Bennett, Jacob's stepfather, was arrested, his dark past exposed for all to see. The corrupt system that had allowed abuse to flourish was beginning to crumble. And though Thomas Miller was no longer alive to see it, his sacrifice had not been in vain. The community was beginning to heal. Sarah sat with Emily in the living room, Charlie resting peacefully by their side. The storm had passed, and the truth had been revealed. They had been through so much, but they had emerged stronger, closer than ever before. Charlie had completed his mission. He had protected his family, just as he had always done. And now, the Parkers could finally move forward, knowing that the truth had won, that justice had been served. Reflection. This story is a powerful reminder of the lengths we will go to protect those we love. It shows how loyalty, courage, and the pursuit of truth can bring about healing, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Charlie, a retired police dog, teaches us that sometimes protection doesn't follow the rules. It takes resilience, strength, and the willingness to stand up for what's right, no matter the cost. The Parkers' journey reveals the importance of trust in one another, the power of community, and the value of never giving up, even when the path ahead seems uncertain. Just as Charlie was unwavering in his duty, we too must stand firm in the face of challenges, knowing that we are not alone in our struggles. What do you think of the Parkers' journey and Charlie's role in unveiling the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know if you've ever experienced a similar bond with your dog. Don't forget to subscribe to the Heart Force channel for more inspirational stories about loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between dogs and humans. The morning fog draped over the small town of Green Hollow like a heavy blanket, muffling the sounds of life that would normally fill the streets. At the edge of town, the town had promised him peace, but it had only served to remind him of the case he could never forget. The case that broke him. 2 decades ago, Elijah had walked away from the FBI with his head held high, but the guilt of an unsolved case had haunted him every day since. The disappearance of a young girl, Mia Turner. An investigation that had spiraled out of control, slipping through his fingers like sand. Key witnesses had disappeared. Evidence had been tampered with. And the man they had suspected, an influential businessman, had walked free. Elijah had failed her. And yet, here he was in this tiny town, alone with his thoughts. The silence was supposed to be comforting, but only amplified his failures. Then a bark. It was unlike any other sound in the sleepy town of Green Hollow. Desperate, urgent. Elijah froze, his heart racing. He had learned to trust his instincts during his time in law enforcement, and every one of them was screaming that this wasn't just any dog. He turned, his eyes scanning the mist that enveloped his front yard. Out of the fog emerged a German shepherd, its coat matted with dirt and leaves. Its amber eyes locked onto his with an intelligence that sent a chill down his spine. The dog barked again, louder this time, and Elijah felt a strange pull in his chest. He set his coffee down, every instinct telling him that this moment would change everything. The dog didn't run off like most strays. It lingered, staring at him with a purpose, then took a few steps toward the woods. It looked back, waiting for Elijah to follow. And for the first time in years, Elijah's old investigative instincts flared up, the fog of regret and resignation lifting from his mind. This wasn't a random encounter. Elijah was certain of it. The dog's determined gaze held a message, one he couldn't quite decipher, but one he knew he had to follow. With a heavy sigh, he stood up, brushing the dirt off his worn jeans. The old, familiar thrill of the hunt flooded his veins as he walked toward the woods, the dog leading the way. Elijah followed the dog through the thick woods, each step weighed with the mystery of the moment. His eyes flicked nervously from one shadow to the next, expecting something, anything, that might explain the dog's unusual behavior. The German shepherd's movements were swift and purposeful, leading him deeper into the forest, past towering oaks and tangled underbrush. It was as if the dog knew exactly where it was going, and Elijah was merely a passenger, caught in the wake of its silent resolve. The morning mist hung thick between the trees, distorting the world around him, but the dog remained unfazed, its eyes fixed ahead, unwavering. Elijah couldn't help but feel that this was no coincidence. After all, what were the odds that a retired FBI agent, broken by a case that never seemed to end, would cross paths with a dog who seemed to carry more secrets than anyone Elijah had ever known? As the dog led him further, Elijah's thoughts began to drift back to the past, to Mia Turner, to the case that had haunted him for years. He had thought that walking away from it all would bring peace, but instead, it had only intensified the noise in his mind, the guilt, the feeling that justice was a game of chess where the pieces moved without his control. But now, as he trudged deeper into the woods, he felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe this dog, this strange encounter, was the key to something larger. Maybe it could bring the redemption he had longed for, something, anything, to ease the weight that crushed him every day. After what felt like an eternity, the dog stopped at the edge of a clearing. Elijah stood still, watching the animal as it circled, its tail stiff with tension. Something wasn't right. He had learned to read the signs, even in retirement. There was danger ahead. Stay here, Elijah murmured to the dog, as though it would understand. He crouched low, moving with the silence of someone who had spent too many years in the shadows. The clearing was small, but the air felt heavy, thick with something unnatural. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the area. At first, he saw nothing out of the ordinary. But then his gaze fell upon a small, crumpled figure lying on the ground in the center of the clearing. His heart skipped a beat as he recognized the figure, Sarah Miller, a local environmental researcher. Her body was motionless, her blonde hair spread out around her, but to his relief, she was still breathing. Before Elijah could move, the dog let out a low growl, its eyes now locked onto a figure in the shadows. Elijah's heart raced. He recognized the man immediately. The last person he wanted to see, Robert Maxwell, the man who had evaded justice for far too long, and whose connections had once pulled the strings behind Mia Turner's disappearance. Maxwell stood just beyond the trees, watching them. His cold eyes gleamed with familiarity and disdain. Elijah froze, every muscle in his body tense. He knew this confrontation was inevitable. But the question remained. How had Maxwell found Sarah? How had he known she would be here? Maxwell's lips curled into a smug smile, one that seemed to say everything Elijah needed to know. You really thought you could escape this, Elijah? Maxwell's voice was low, almost mocking. You think this dog, this mutt, will save you? It's too late. You're too late. But Elijah wasn't scared. Not anymore. Not with Sarah's life hanging in the balance. He had been a fool for too long, letting guilt and fear control him. He wasn't going to let Maxwell win this time. Elijah's eyes flicked to the German shepherd, who was now standing perfectly still, watching Maxwell with a focus that was nothing short of calculated. He'd seen it before, trained K-9 units, capable of detecting the smallest shifts in a person's energy, their intentions. This dog was more than just an animal. It was a partner, and together they were going to end this. With a steadying breath, Elijah stood tall. "I'm not running from you anymore, Maxwell," he said, his voice clear and strong. "You can't bury the truth. Not this time." The tension in the air was palpable, every second stretching longer than the last. Elijah's eyes never left Maxwell, the man who had haunted his nightmares for years. The German shepherd stood between them, a silent but powerful barrier. Maxwell's gaze flickered from the dog to Elijah, his smug expression turning to one of thinly veiled frustration. "You think this dog can stop me?" Maxwell sneered, his hands slowly flexing at his sides, as if preparing to strike. "You've lost, Elijah. This town is mine. These people are mine. And your little investigation? It's over." Elijah's grip tightened on the worn handle of the flashlight in his hand. He had been down this road before, alone, outnumbered and outgunned. But this time, it was different. This time, he wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for redemption, for something larger than himself. "This ends today," Elijah said firmly, his voice steady, though his pulse raced. He didn't look at Maxwell anymore. His focus was on the dog, the unshakable creature that stood as his ally in this moment of chaos. The German shepherd, hero as Elijah had come to think of him, moved with calculated precision. The dog's body was taut with readiness, its amber eyes fixed not on Maxwell, but on the patterns of movement in the surrounding forest. Elijah could feel the shift in the air as Hero began to circle, staying low, preparing to act. Maxwell took a step forward, his arrogance apparent in the way he moved. "You really think anyone's going to believe you? You think they'll buy your story about me?" he hissed. "You're just a washed-up agent, living in a fantasy world. The truth is, they'll believe whatever I tell them. I hold the power here, not you." But Elijah wasn't intimidated. He had faced worse than this. He had fought for justice in places far more dangerous than this sleepy town. He had known corruption. He had seen it firsthand. And now, standing with Hero by his side, the only thing that mattered was seeing this through to the end. Then, as if to prove Elijah's point, Hero let out a sharp bark, signaling the start of their final confrontation. Without hesitation, the dog lunged toward Maxwell, its movements swift and precise. Maxwell stumbled backward, eyes wide with shock, as the dog's teeth sank into the sleeve of his jacket, pinning him in place. "You think this is over?" Maxwell spat, struggling against the dog's hold. His composure faltered, but his pride was unbroken. "You're too late." Elijah moved in, his hand reaching into his coat pocket, fingers brushing against the small, concealed piece of evidence he'd kept hidden for years, the key to unraveling Maxwell's empire. He didn't have to say a word. The dog knew what was needed. Hero shifted, keeping Maxwell occupied, while Elijah carefully moved behind him, his every step deliberate, as though this had been a plan in the making for a long time. The moment felt like it lasted an eternity, the forest around them standing still, holding its breath. For years, Elijah had been chasing ghosts, unsolved cases, dead ends, and lost opportunities. But now, with Hero's unwavering presence, with Sarah's courage, and with the truth finally within his reach, Elijah knew that this was his moment of redemption. Maxwell was cornered, his back to the cold tree trunk. "You won't get away with this," he growled, his voice shaky now, no longer the confident EO he had been when he'd first walked into this town. His eyes darted between Elijah and the dog, realizing, perhaps for the first time, that the power was no longer in his hands. "You're wrong," Elijah said, his voice calm. yet filled with the weight of a man who had waited far too long for this moment. The truth is stronger than your lies, Maxwell. You'll face justice, and this time you won't escape. With a final tug of his hand, Elijah revealed the folder, evidence that had been painstakingly gathered over the years, a culmination of every lead, every piece of truth, and every sacrifice. The evidence was damning, undeniable. Maxwell's empire of corruption, his manipulation of the town, and his dirty dealings. Everything was there. And this time, there would be no escaping it. Maxwell's face twisted in disbelief as Elijah held up the folder. "This is over, Maxwell," Elijah said, his words final, his resolve unwavering. "You can't run anymore. You can't hide." Maxwell's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. He had underestimated the power of truth, the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. And in that moment, standing before Elijah, he understood just how wrong he had been. Hero released his grip on Maxwell's sleeve and moved to stand by Elijah's side once again, the dog's body still and alert. Elijah reached down to give Hero a pat on the head, his heart swelling with gratitude. He had been saved by this dog, this incredible animal who had been more than just a protector. Hero had been a partner, a companion, and now, a symbol of the justice that had long eluded Elijah. As the sound of sirens grew nearer, Elijah felt a sense of peace wash over him. The town of Green Hollow would never be the same, and neither would he. The past, with all its regrets and guilt, was finally behind him. But the future, his future, was just beginning. The morning after Maxwell's capture, Green Hollow began to stir with an energy that hadn't been felt in years. People whispered in hushed tones, exchanging theories and rumors about what had transpired the night before. Yet, amidst the town's commotion, Elijah sat at the small kitchen table in his home, a place that had once been a sanctuary. Now the scene of a victory he hadn't fully processed. Hero lay quietly at his feet, the dog's steady breathing filling the silence. Elijah ran a hand over his face, the weariness of the past few days crashing over him. It wasn't over, not yet. The fight for justice had only just begun. Maxwell's arrest was just the first domino to fall. But Elijah knew better than anyone that a network like Maxwell's didn't fall easily. There were still threats to confront, still a web of corruption to unravel. And there was still the matter of Sarah. The young environmental researcher had been through more than anyone should have to endure in a lifetime, and yet she stood strong. Elijah had watched as she sifted through the evidence, piecing together the puzzle her mother, Catherine Mitchell, had started years ago. It was clear now that Catherine's death wasn't an accident. It had been orchestrated to silence her. But as Elijah had learned all too well, the truth always has a way of finding its voice. Elijah felt a familiar tug in his chest as he glanced at Sarah's house, just a few miles down the road. He had promised to stay by her side. He had promised that her mother's work, her legacy, wouldn't be lost. But each promise was a weight, and Elijah could feel the pull of his past, the fear of failure rising within him. He couldn't lose Sarah too. "I'll see this through," he whispered to himself, as if saying it aloud could somehow make it more real. "For Catherine, for Mia, and for you." He stood up, the creaking of the floorboards beneath his feet snapping him back to the present. Hero's head lifted, his intelligent eyes locking onto Elijah's. Without a word, the dog stood and trotted toward the door, as though urging Elijah forward, reminding him of the purpose that had brought them here. The days stretched ahead of him, filled with meetings, briefings, and plans. Elijah couldn't afford to lose sight of their goal. Maxwell's influence didn't end with his arrest. The town was still reeling. still torn between those who had benefited from Maxwell's wealth and those whose lives had been destroyed by it. The truth had surfaced, but it had yet to fully penetrate the walls of denial built by decades of corporate power. As Elijah made his way to Sarah's house, he found her sitting in the small, cluttered office where she had spent countless hours uncovering the truth her mother had died trying to expose. She looked up as he entered, her face tired but determined. Her mother's journals lay scattered across the desk, pages filled with meticulous notes, evidence, and names. Elijah could see the weight of it all on her shoulders, but she didn't let it show. "Good morning," Sarah said softly, her voice still hoarse from the emotional exhaustion of the past few days. "I was just reviewing some of the last files my mom left behind. There's still so much we need to piece together." Elijah nodded, pulling up a chair across from her. "You're not alone in this. We'll finish it together." Sarah gave him a small smile, though there was a quiet sadness in her eyes. She had lost everything: her mother, her peace of mind, her security, but what she had found in the process was something far greater. She had found the truth, and it was worth the fight. "Do you think we can actually stop him?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them. Elijah didn't hesitate. "We will. Maxwell may have had the power, but we have something he can't control: the truth." The truth had a way of breaking things down, of exposing the darkest corners of the world. And Elijah had seen enough to know that no amount of money or influence could hold back a story that was meant to be told. He had spent years in the shadows, but now the light was breaking through. As they continued to sift through Catherine's work, a sense of urgency settled over them both. They had come too far to stop now. Elijah could feel the walls of the town closing in, but this time, he wouldn't let the truth be buried again. The revelations they had uncovered were just the beginning of the storm that would sweep through Green Hollow, and they had to be ready. Elijah stood, glancing at Hero, who had moved to the window, watching the world outside with quiet vigilance. The dog had been his partner in this fight, the silent protector, and the one constant through it all. Hero's loyalty had never wavered, and Elijah knew that no matter what came next, the dog would be by his side. "I'll be back later," Elijah said, his voice firm as he glanced at Sarah. "We've got a lot of work to do." As he turned to leave, Hero followed him to the door. The dog's presence was a reminder of the promises they had made, of the lives they had vowed to protect. Elijah wasn't walking this path alone, not anymore. The days following Maxwell's arrest had been a whirlwind, and yet, for Elijah, it all felt like a slow-moving storm. The air in Green Hollow was heavy with anticipation, a town on the brink of transformation. As Elijah stood in the center of the small town square, he could feel the tension in the streets. The truth had been exposed, but the real battle was just beginning. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt businessman anymore. It was about reclaiming the town's soul. Maxwell's empire had been built on lies, manipulation, and fear, but now that foundation was crumbling. People were starting to talk. Whispers of environmental violations, corporate corruption, and the devastating impact Maxwell had had on the town's water supply spread like wildfire. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Elijah met with Sarah outside the courthouse, where the final hearing for Maxwell's criminal charges would take place. The weight of the moment was palpable, but Sarah's determination kept him grounded. Hero, as always, stood by their side, the dog's watchful eyes scanning their surroundings with the same steady calm he had shown since their journey began. "Are you ready for this?" Elijah asked, his voice low but steady. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding. "I don't think there's ever a point where you're ready for something like this. But I've come too far to back down now. We have to see this through." Her words hit Elijah harder than he expected. He had spent his entire career chasing justice, but it wasn't until he met Sarah and Hero that he understood what it truly meant to fight for the truth, no matter the cost. Together, we'll finish what your mother started, Elijah said firmly. He gave Sarah a reassuring smile, though he knew they were about to face their toughest challenge yet. The courtroom was filled with tension as the trial began. Maxwell, still in his usual sharp suit, sat at the defense table, his eyes scanning the room with that familiar arrogance. But this time, his facade was cracked. His empire was falling apart, and nothing he did could stop it. The documents they had collected, photos, water samples, financial records, everything was laid bare for the world to see. No more hiding, no more lies. The courtroom doors opened, and the room fell silent as Sarah walked in, head held high. She was flanked by Elijah, who kept a protective hand on her shoulder, and Hero, who trotted beside them, his eyes unwavering. There was no turning back now. Elijah watched Maxwell's face as Sarah took her seat in the witness stand. The man's smug expression faltered, just for a moment. His hand trembled as he adjusted his cufflinks. But he quickly regained his composure. Elijah knew that Maxwell feared Sarah more than he cared to admit. She was the last person he wanted to face, his worst nightmare come to life. The trial unfolded with shocking clarity, as Sarah recounted her mother's investigation and the web of corruption that had surrounded Maxwell for years. She spoke with calm precision, detailing the evidence and the lengths to which Maxwell had gone to silence her mother. But it was her final statement that shook the room to its core. "I spent 5 years believing my mother was dead," Sarah said, her voice unwavering as she looked directly at Maxwell. "But I now know that she died for a reason. She died to expose you. She died to protect me. And now I will finish what she started." Maxwell's face twisted in rage, but he knew it was over. The walls were closing in, and there was nowhere left to hide. The evidence was irrefutable, and the people of Green Hollow were starting to demand accountability. As the trial came to a close, Elijah felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The years of guilt, the years of feeling like a failure, were finally fading into the background. The truth had been revealed, and it was powerful enough to bring down even the most entrenched corruption. Maxwell's conviction was inevitable. As the gavel slammed down, Elijah let out a slow breath. It was over, but as he turned to Sarah, he realized that the true victory was not in the courtroom. It was in the quiet moments that followed, the healing that had begun, the lives that were being rebuilt, and the community that was finally waking up. Hero, sensing the shift, nudged his head against Elijah's hand. The dog had been more than a companion. He had been a symbol of hope, loyalty, and the unwavering power of truth. He had led them through the darkest moments. And now, as the sun began to set over Green Hollow, Elijah knew that their journey was far from over. "We did it, Hero," Elijah whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We did it." Sarah smiled beside him, a tear slipping down her cheek as she reached down to stroke Hero's head. The dog responded with a soft nudge, as if to remind them that, though the battle had been won, the fight for a better future was just beginning. As the federal agents began to move in on Maxwell, the town of Green Hollow started to change. People gathered in the streets, their faces filled with relief, hope, and determination. Elijah knew that this was only the beginning of their healing process. The scars of the past would take time to fade. But with Hero by their side, with the truth finally out in the open, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. The journey had been long and filled with pain, but the truth had set them free. And as the last of the federal agents loaded Maxwell into a van, Elijah turned to Sarah and Hero, his heart swelling with gratitude. They had fought together, and together they had won. In this story, we witnessed how loyalty, courage, and perseverance can change the course of not only one person's life, but an entire community. Elijah, Sarah, and Hero showed us that no matter how dark the road may seem, the truth always finds its way to the light. It's a reminder that no matter what obstacles we face, with faith in each other and in the right cause, we can overcome even the greatest of challenges. What did you think of the story? Let us know your thoughts and feelings in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to the Heart Force channel for more inspiring stories about change, healing, and the incredible bond between dogs and their people.